I know. Hello and welcome to the Mystic Chat. And in this episode, we have the fabulous Angie Buchanan, who's going to be talking to us about the sacredness of being a death midwife. Just to introduce myself, my name is Allaun. I am a published author. I am also a pagan priest, among many other things. And I would like to take this time to introduce Ruby Ruse. Ruby, introduce yourself for just a minute.
Hello, I'm Ruby Ruse. I am a pagan and magical YouTube artist. My channel name is Fairy Fortunes. I also have a website, www.fairyfortunes.com. I specialize in work with fairy folklore and fairy magic, but I do a host of different things on my channel, so I do hope you'll check that out. And I'm very, very pleased to introduce our additional co-host, Laura Gonzalez.
Hello, everybody. Hi, my name is Laura Gonzalez. I'm a teratologist, bruja, witch for hire, podcast person. Yeah, I forgot the pew pew. Priestess of the goddess, ordained minister, and yeah. And what else do I do? Video blogs, the TV, tarot readings, and of course, I am very happy to be here today with y'all. And I would like to introduce my dear friend, Luke.
Hey, everybody. My name is Luke. I'm a devotional polytheist, work mainly with the Norse and Hellenic pantheons. I am also a writer over at The Wild Hunt. I've got a column over there that happens about once a month. And I'm sure that you'll hear more about me, but I'll pass it over to Angie, our guest today, to introduce herself. Angie?
Hi, it's great to be here. My name's Angie Buchanan. I'm a family tradition pagan. I am a minister with Earth Traditions Church, and I'm a certified death midwife and death midwife instructor. So I wear a lot of different hats. I work with pagan students at the University of Chicago. I'm a spiritual advisor there, and I'm excited to share some information with you and to hear what kind of questions you have and to just sort of let this roll out.
That's awesome. So I have known Angie for how long? I want to say about 19, 20 years. It's been a long time. And Angie's one of my favorite people because we are definitely cut from the same cloth. We laugh at the same very bad jokes and all things like that. So I am excited to have her here. And I'm excited to talk about being a death midwife and what that is, because as you all know, the ancestors and that type of work is very sacred to me. And Angie was the one who certified me as being a death midwife. So I have my death midwife teacher here, and how fabulous is that? Angie, so let's begin with explaining to all of us, what in the world is a death midwife?
Okay, so I think everybody here probably knows what a birth midwife is. It's somebody that stands in the threshold and helps bring a new individual into the world. And a death midwife stands in the death threshold and helps an individual leave this world. So we are a non-medical, holistic practitioners who aim to serve, not fix, and to provide comfort and compassion to anyone who is undergoing their final rite of passage. And we work with people from all shapes, sizes, faiths, colors, persuasions, because of the main spoiler alert about death, which is that nobody gets out alive. And so, coming to a theater near you. So yeah, and the reason that we want to do this work is because as a pagan, I specifically view death as our final rite of passage. and we're missing it. We live in a death-denying culture, and we're missing it. So I'm there to help you make a plan and discover and explore, and help yourself and your families prepare for your final rite of passage.
So one of the things I notice and I appreciate about being a death midwife is that you don't have to know about magical energy. You don't really have to know about healing energy. You don't have to know about any of those things, because you're just one of the big things is that you're holding space. Can you talk about what that is, and why you don't do the quote unquote healing aspect of it, like the energy work of it, like all that? So why don't you do that?
Well, I think there's a sort of a vocabulary that we are limited to work within, but essentially the idea of holding vigil or holding space for someone to complete that rite of passage, it can involve some energetic work, but the idea of it is that no matter what, first of all, I need to preface that by saying that I am completely not interested in what my person believes is going to happen to them after they die. It's none of my business. Unless I am working as a minister as well with someone who is known to me and whose belief structures I know, I don't need to service any of that, because no matter what people believe, the one thing that we can agree on ultimately is that when you exhale for that final time, whatever it is that animates you leaves, and you cease to be a human being. And that, my friends, is sacred. And that is worth working with. And you don't have to believe in energy. Energy is not something that requires belief any more than wind requires belief. Energy happens. And when you're in that sacred space, in that threshold of dying, and you are prepared and focused on that person, because it is all about them and not about you, then the magic is going to happen on its own, and you can call it whatever you like. And things are going to show up, and things are going to shift and move, and you may see and hear and smell things that you're not quite sure, is that's what's going on, or are you just imagining it? And you may have no experience whatsoever. Every single death is different. But so there's so much that can happen in that threshold. And, I like to tell people, you breathe in, you live, you exhale, you die. That threshold is death.
Angie, oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I just wanted to ask a really newbie question, right? Can I just ask sort of practically what being a death midwife looks like? Like, I'm assuming you're contacted by the person who's about to pass and you show up. What are some of the things that happen after that?
Well, you're kind of jumping into the middle of where I can show up. So I can show up anywhere. And the fact is that we all need to be planning for this. I have 30-year-olds who maybe just got married, and now they've bought a house and they're thinking about bringing children in, and they needed to figure out, the questions. You have to know the questions before, they're almost more important than the answers. So how do you go about getting a will? Who are you going to leave things to? Who are you going to designate particular actions and things to? It is incredibly important for you to have these things in place. And it doesn't matter whether you have a lot of assets or, just a few, but there are things that you're going to need help with. And you need to sort of get your posse together about, who's it going to be that if you're in a car accident and you're unable to make choices about your end of life level of what kind of medical intervention you want, what level of medical intervention you want? Who's going to make those decisions for you? Have you talked to that person? Because this is not something that you want to surprise somebody with. And so I can do death planning, which would be the first step that I would do with a younger couple, or, you know, it doesn't have to be a younger couple, but death planning is really important. A will, a living will, your DNR, your durable power of attorney for healthcare, durable power of attorney for finance, body disposition. You know, let's really, as pagans, we need to be having this conversation because our current burial practices are unsustainable ecologically. We are poisoning our earth. 860,000 gallons of formaldehyde every year going into our groundwater. It can't sustain. Steel, concrete, hardwoods, varnishes, and everybody thinks, oh, well, okay, I won't be buried. I'll just be cremated. Not much better. Better, but not much better. But there are a bunch of new kids on the block with regard to body disposition. You need to know about them. So we talk about that. At that point, you know, I could also come in when you're first diagnosed. So, you know, when you get that first message that you have a terminal illness and an immediate terminal illness, because life is terminal. So, you know, at that point, there's the whole grieving piece of it that comes into being, because now you've stepped from having expectations about how your life is going to go to having to come face to face with your mortality. And there's grief that goes along with that. There's anticipatory grief, which is different than regular grief from loss. So we can talk about some of the characteristics of that and what the expectations are, you know, what it's going to look like, how your circle of influence is going to build itself, who's on the inside, who's on the next circle out, who's on the circle out after that, and how does that interact? You know, it's just really important to have these conversations. Who's going to shut down your Facebook page? Who's going to come into your house, get your journals, your sex toys, your whatever you don't want mom to see? Who's going to do that for you? And you know, you've wound, you know, when you wind me up like this with a question that sort of has a fat answer, Luke.
Well, now I have a question for you.
Please.
This sounds like a much longer process than I think any of us, except Chris, really understood. What would you say is the most common service that you handle? Is it the grieving process of the person that's terminally ill, or do you think it's more of the planning process? Like, what's most common, do you think?
Are you asking me personally? Because it's
Yes.
different for every death midwife. For me personally, the thing that I find myself involved in the most is the actual visualing at the end of life, being present in the threshold while the person dies, doing a body blessing, doing an anointing, doing an elemental release. That's where I find most of my work, other than teaching.
What does that look like? Because Chris, I know you were talking about like the spiritual aspect not being as central, but Angie, that sounds like it's very central to that practice.
Before she gets to your question, let me ask one question, because I'm gonna address that. So for people, so we just said you don't have to have the spiritual aspect, and when I mean spiritual aspect, I'm meaning the pagan witchcraft, spell casting, energy work aspect of it. And one of the things I also appreciate about it is you don't have to be a priestess or a minister or a reverend to be a death midwife, but you certainly can, of course, but it's a different skill set. So can you kind of address about how, like, how do I put this? So when a person who doesn't have the clergy training, how is that different than what a death midwife actually does? Because you already talked about the practicality of it, but if I don't have any training or any magical training or even clergy training, how would I be able to um, be a death midwife? I mean, granted, we have to have the training, we have to have the things like that, but without the, I guess, the priestcraft of it.
Mhm. Well, first of all, I was answering personally what Amy asked me. That is what I do. But I think that's part of the reason that it's important to get training with these things. You know, maybe one day we won't need it anymore, but right now we live in a death denying culture, and we have to retrain ourselves how to absorb and incorporate death as to normalize it as a natural end of life. So when I teach people how to deal with, you know, we actually do a vignette, a scenario of, okay, now this person is dead. One of the things that I do is when I'm working with a family optimally and not called in at the last minute, I will ask them, you know, what is it that you want to do? Here are some options for you. Most of them will opt to do a final bathing, which is not your scrub down the, you know, the sweaty gym stuff off. This is a ceremonial bath that I do not do. I oversee the family doing it, because this is the last time that that family's ever going to touch their beloved. And so, you know, what might, and again, I'm limited by vocabulary. This is a profound moment. And in my vocabulary, this is sacred. It is the same awestruck, gobsmacked, holy crap, you know, that can happen if you witness a birth, where, you know, you've got several people working in the room and they're all busy doing stuff and the mom's working really hard, and then bam, suddenly there's another freaking person in the room, you know, and that's a magical moment. You know, that mother has gone into the other worlds. It's a, you know, I don't know what other word to use other than a shamanic type thing where she's got a foot in both worlds and she's producing another human being. And this is, again, a lot of people in the room are busy. Death looks an awful lot like birth. Sometimes there's breathing, there's transitions, there's different stages of it, you know, that look an awful lot like birth. And so you got somebody that might be working really hard, and then bam, there's one less person in the room. Holy crap, that's sacred. So, so that's what I mean about a spiritual aspect of it. It doesn't have to be anybody in particular. You know, it doesn't have to be your god or your goddess, or, you know, I've dealt with families who are very devout Christians. I've dealt with, you know, families who are Jewish. The fact is that we're human, and we're there to acknowledge and to absorb and bear witness to the fact that this person is now gone from their body. This is just their body. And what are we going to do to honor them? What are we going to do to take care of them? There are certain things that I will do that the family might not even realize that I'm doing. One of those things is, if I'm sitting with someone, generally I try to be up near the head, and I will sometimes try to match my breath to theirs. I'll encourage the family to help too, but a lot of times it's really hard to do that and sob at the same time. So, you know, I'm sort of that neutral space for them. I'm that anchor for them so that they can experience their grief. And so that this person can have a good death. And one of the other things that I like to do is, once they're gone, I'll lean over very close to their ear and I'll tell them they're dead, but that they're still not alone and that we're going to take care of them.
I have a question. Because you keep mentioning that we live in a very death-averse culture, and I agree with you on that. Do you ever encounter any resistance with like hospital staff or nursing homes, anything like that?
Um, you know, by the time I'm there, I usually am able to establish a rapport with the medical staff. I have to tell you, the hospice people that I have worked with, they love us. Even to a point where when they come to do the declaration, I will often ask them, you know, could you please clean up the body? And they'll do the actual bathing. And then the family will come in to do the ceremonial bath, and probably 4 out of 5 of the hospice people will politely ask if they can stay, if the family will agree to it. And I have trained a bunch. In fact, one of my classes that's on hold right now is a group of 17 hospice workers who asked me to come in and train them.
That's
I have
amazing.
registered nurses, I have physicians, I have veterinarians and vet techs, dog groomers, people that don't want to work with people, they want to work with animal death.
I have a commentary that I would like to segue so you can like expand on that. And I also have a question. So the commentary is in a similar forum that what we're having today. The person that was teaching mentioned, you know, you can brush their hair, you can caress them, you can, you know, make them feel comfortable and well loved. And my eyes and my heart was expanding because I'm like, don't touch my hair. I don't like anybody touching my hair. I will never allow anybody to touch my hair. So if I'm actively dying and the death midwife is trying to be nice and is touching my hair, I'm going to stay there being like, you know. So I would like you to talk into the importance of the wishes of the person who's actively dying. And also the hard question I have to ask, Angie, how has COVID impacted your work? Other than your class being on pause, a lot of people are dying. So how is that affecting you in a personal level, of course, if you will?
Of course, and those are great. So thank you for bringing those up. And first of all, you know, let me ask you, Laura, do you have it written down that you don't want anybody to touch your hair?
Not yet. And I keep saying I'm going to do it. And every year at this time of the year, I keep saying I'm going to do it. And I haven't done it. And I think it's fear. I think we are very afraid to put those things in writing, you know. I mean, my family know, my friends know, but it's not in writing anywhere. So yeah, it's very important.
I think it is very important because it's all about you. It's all about you. It's not about me. It's not about even your family at that point, you know, any more than giving birth is about anybody other than the person giving birth. So your death is not about anybody but you. And as a death midwife, you know, one of the first things that I would do is an intake. And I would ask you, I have like pages of questions that I would ask you about. Are there people that you want to see? Are there people that you don't want to see? Is there somebody that you've got something unresolved with? Would you like to write a letter? I can deliver it after you're gone. But we have to be able to have those conversations frankly, you know, because we're talking about you being gone. So it's, you know, it's not like I can come in here and you know, tiptoe around anything. We have to have very direct conversations. So generally the people that I work with are not people who are unaware that they are dying, or their family has called me in because they don't know how to tell them. And what I have discovered is that generally either I usually get one of two things. I get the person who says, I knew that, I was just trying not to let anybody else freak out over it. You know, I didn't want to upset my family. And I was like, well, funny that, because, you know, your family asked me to have this conversation with you. And so, you know, let's everybody stop tiptoeing around, because we all know the elephant is exposed. You know, there's an elephant in the living room and now we can talk about it. And then the other thing is maybe they kind of knew, but they finally give up. You know, it's like you know, okay, I guess I'm really going to have to face this.
Mm,
And then we deal with the grief piece of it. And
mm,
we deal with making everything as good as we can as we move toward this final destination. So, with COVID, to get to this, did I get that first part okay? Okay, okay. Yeah, yeah, if I'm involved, I will not touch your hair. And any death midwife that you have should know that, and whatever else, you know, red nail polish only, you know? So, with regard to COVID, oh, of course, you know, of course it has impacted us in really strange ways, but it has also really made us have to scramble to be creative. And I have done bedside vigil on FaceTime and Zoom. I've had funerals on Zoom. I have guided families, you know, a family of 25 people who nobody could get in to see him, and he was actively dying of COVID. And so we contacted the nurse. I chatted with her, and one of the people in the family sent out his shirts to other family members. And those family members were either wearing his shirt or they had put it on like a bed pillow or a bolster or something and were holding it. And then they were talking to him, we were singing to him, you know, and the nurse was there helping. And when we were done, I had gotten her a bottle of oil and she did the body anointing for us, all on Zoom. It's the next best thing to be in there. I hate it. I'd much rather be there in person, but I don't want anybody to have to die alone. And even if I have to be on a TV screen, you know, doing whatever it is that I need to do, and coming up with these kinds of creative ideas. And there are a bunch of other things that we've done too with people who haven't been able to get to their beloveds.
mhm.
It's a new meaning to being there in spirit.
Yeah.
Sort of. I was going to ask a question, Chris.
No,
but
go
you
ahead.
can
I
go
have
ahead.
but you can go.
So sort of on the topic of like current events and how things are changing, I'd be really interested in hearing about if, and if so, how being a death midwife sort of like informs your understanding of other people's like of grief or different kinds of grief. Because I know I've been seeing lots of like processing of grief about like the nation, for example, right now, or like the death of ideas about the nation during the last 6 months. And is that I guess I'm just wondering, like from a death midwife perspective, is that a similar process? Is it very different? Does it not even make sense to compare them? Like,
Grief is multifaceted, multi-layered, and individual. I mean, like fingerprint snowflake individual. Nobody experiences it the same way. So whenever you are dealing with someone who is in grief, you have to be open to meet that person where they are. And it manifests in a lot of different ways. Now, Kubler-Ross came up with the 5 stages of grief, which was never intended to be, you know, it's in the public lexicon, but it was never intended to be a mandate about this is the way that grief is going to roll out and here's what you can expect. It was just a guideline. And but it does help to help you figure out where somebody is on the map. And when you know somebody's grieving and you get this sort of burst of anger or bargaining or depression, or, you know, they can go through all of these different moods. They get stuck sometimes in one and then they'll jump back and forth between them. And it can happen in the space of a traffic light and it's completely unpredictable. But I think, you know, it does translate into other things in life, loss of marriages or relationships, loss of a job, loss of a nation. You know, those things are all aspects or reasons or motivations for grief. But the manifestation of grief in and of itself is different for everybody. So there's no one size fits all treatment for it.
That's awesome. One of the things I wanted to talk about is that when I took the class, one of the things I really appreciated was how, if the loved ones are open to it, how you can incorporate them into the process, the funeral process, and the blessing, because if you go to a memorial or a mainstream religious funeral, it's everybody wears black, their head is down, and someone is speaking at them, and you hear all the time, oh, funerals aren't for the dead, they're for the living. And I always had a problem with that. So can you talk about how you may sometimes incorporate the loved ones into the funeral process, in what that looks like?
Sure. I'm a huge advocate for home funerals, mostly because the average funeral in the United States today is $8,500. And I've seen them 45,000, 50,000. And it's the funeral industry is a $13 billion a year industry. And that really nice guy in the sort of uncomfortable looking suit holding that box of Kleenex, he's trained to be compassionate. So he's going to give you 4-hour increment to get over it. And I think that there's something fundamentally wrong with our society in that we have to hide death like this. So I'm a huge advocate of, and especially from children. Excuse me. We have done a great disservice to our children by denying them the ability to see death in reality, by trying to protect them from it. It's inevitable, it's going to happen, and having children that don't understand it has resulted in children hurting each other because they don't understand what it means to die. So there was a study done not so long ago, I think 3 or 4 years, where they interviewed like 20 children under the age of 12 who had accidentally shot and killed somebody. And the interviewer was trying to find out what the common denominator was. And what he asked them was, what were you expecting when this happened? And they said, I didn't realize that they wouldn't ever get up. Excuse me.
Your puppies are happy.
Here in the background. So they, the children didn't understand. They play video games where somebody bleeds out in the street and they hit the reset button and that person's back up. They see Hollywood films where an actor gets blown up on a beach and 3 months later they're in another film where they get the love interest. So, we're not talking about this with our kids. They don't get it. Maybe their goldfish dies and that's as far as they may get. So the idea of incorporating them into end-of-life planning is essential. And there's all sorts of things that they can do. They can help with the body blessing. They can hold flowers. They can, if it's a cremation or a natural burial, the box is cardboard. It's a heavy grade cardboard. Painting it, doing artwork on it. That's a family project. Handprints, paw prints, messages, notes. It's an art project for the family to actually have their grief flow into. And so there's nothing I can do about that. I'm sorry.
I love it. It's the hellhounds. That's what it is.
So the bottom line is that, we have to be able to incorporate families. We have to have family buy-in. They never do this.
I think it's the conversations that we're having. I think, and I truly believe this, I'm not trying to be funny. I think,
We hear this conversation all the time.
well, no, I mean, when a group of magical people are like really focused, it's like the energy is there. And so the dogs are like, oh, hey, you know, the energy is here and all that stuff. Um, so while Angie is taking care of her hellhounds and all that stuff, um, let me unmute.
Sorry, I had to catch one.
Let me unmute Laura real quick. Okay, I think I should do it.
Thank you. I love that the doggies are going crazy, and I had to unmute. I'm sorry because there's still family moving around here. But oh my God, I think we could talk about this with Angie for another 3 hours. Because culturally, for example, you know, the third world countries, as they design and designate countries like Mexico, we have such a understanding of death because we don't have the resources to sanitize and make everything look pristine and hygienic. So the dead dies at home, the funeral is done at home, the vigil is done at home, and then if you have enough for a burial, then you do it. But you know, usually it's like you have a plot and they're gonna throw it in there and then that's it. So I find it quite interesting that labors such as yours are brought to light because the United States definitely needs to join the third world in things that are really important, and or take off the mask of first world because we know it's a farce, but that's another conversation. But also I want you to please talk about, and again I will segue with an anecdote. Here in Death Midwives and their work, I'm like, I could never. I'm very emotional, and I will be crying with the family. I will not be that anchor of centering as you were speaking of. I will be crying with them. So I think I could, me, Laura, I could do a lot better with the grieving family afterwards, but not the dead and dying. So the question is, how do you recommend people to be actively involved, whether if they're a midwife or a minister or a reverend or a priestess or a witch or a family member, according to the levels of comfort that they can bring into the process?
Well, I think that there are a lot of death midwives who have areas of this that they specialize in. So some of them like to sit vigil. Some of them are all about the death planning, the planning in advance, and then they'll hand them off to somebody else. Others are all about the body blessings, you know, and the elemental releases in my tradition. And there's, you know, so you can pick and choose what it is that you want to do, depending on, you know, where your strengths are. And I kind of briefly touched on this earlier where I said, you know, I have vet techs and veterinarians that come through my class that have no interest at all in working with people. They want to work with pets that are terminal and the families as maybe they're having to euthanize their animal, but they're not really interested in the pet aspect of that. So, you know, there are a lot of different things that you can develop within death midwifery. I tend to plug in wherever I'm called, but you know, sometimes if I'm called from across the country, you know, that's why I keep a directory on my website so that people can find folks that are close to them.
It sounds like there's a lot of opportunity for many different kinds of people to apply to be death midwives. Because as I'm listening to you talk, well, actually, I've been considering your class for years, but I found myself in a position where I found that I was acting how I felt would a death midwife might act. And because I was just in a position where there was an unexpected death, I was the person that wound up at this person's home. And because we had the bond of our occupation together, is that they didn't want a preacher or someone of faith. They wanted me to be there with their vigil. And I remember thinking to myself that I had wished that I had taken your class, because I would have been better prepared for that moment. So can you talk a little bit about like what kinds of people, because it seems like there's a lot of opportunity for a lot of different people to apply for this class and be prepared to help people through this process.
I don't even know where to start to unpack that, because you hit on so many great things, Amy. And thank you. I think, as you know, I also have a background in law enforcement, and that's kind of where I got cracked open. You know, I started out in the federal prison system, and it was just, AIDS had just gotten its name. And I was one of the only ones that was willing to sit in the hospital and in the med center with these people as they died. And when I went into local law enforcement was when I realized that death doesn't always happen on pretty white sheets in a pristine room. Sometimes it happens in the middle of a crossroad on the asphalt, and you're holding that person. And that was what first opened me up to this work. And, you know, and I found myself doing it's like, once that happens to you, you get cracked open like that, you get that sort of like freak magnet. And everybody that's got somebody that's dying, death will find you, because, you know, you're the one. And, you know, it's the same kind of energy that, you know, when I lived in Chicago, I was the one that would stand at the bus stop and there'd be 45 people there, but I was the one that this guy came over to talk about his divorce with. So, you know, some people are just tuned that way energetically. But to sort of move back into that, there are all sorts of current, non-death related necessarily, people who, and professions that do well having this training, and mental health professionals, clergy,
Massage therapist.
musicians. You know, it's just, and it's the kind of thing where if you do this training, it's not, you don't necessarily have to go to work as a death midwife. Sometimes you just do it for your family or your community, because the information is that important and that powerful that I think everyone needs to have it. Mm-hmm. But it takes a long time to put it together. My class is 3 10-hour days. And, you know, it's a lot of material and a lot of examples. And, you know, and then we get to flush all of that down the toilet when we start talking about people of color, because that's a whole different level of being able to work with people who are discriminated against, not in privileged positions. We've got, and then also there's the homeless people population, there's the trans population. There are all these people who have special needs that we need to be open to, that anyone needs to be able to work with them, or to get right down and face to face with somebody in the family and do with this information download transfer, so that there's someone there that can help. And, you know, I have so many of my students that are in niche markets with this stuff in the populations that they work in. You know, it's just good basic information to have. It's only been 125 years since we stopped caring for our own dying and dead. And we've, you know, now we've got this huge gap between the medical profession and the funeral industry, and nobody knows what to do with that space. And that's where we step in. And that's why it's important.
Not to not to go back to my original question too much, but I know that there's a few things that you've said that you've referenced a couple of times that I'm not clear on, and they sound like they're more on the pagan-y end of the spectrum. I'm thinking specifically of energy release. Is that what you called it?
Elemental release?
Elemental release, yeah. Could you talk a little bit about those and what
Sure.
they are and how they fit in?
Well, here's the thing is, you know, I've done an awful lot of work in the interfaith forums. I've been involved with some pretty significant organizations with regard to interfaith. And, you know, the one thing that you can be assured that you're going to get into trouble with in an interfaith forum is if you say, the one thing we can all believe, because everybody's going to run screaming to the corners of the room, not me. But I love to jack with people with this, because the one thing that we know is that, you know, you take your last breath and you cease to be human, and whoever shows up for you then is not my problem. Muhammad, Jesus, you know, they're all welcome. Come on in. But what I also like to do to really yank their chain is to say that we're also all born pagan, because pagan are people of the earth, right? You breathe in, you live, you exhale, you die. Everything after that's your first sacred cycle. Everything after that, rising and setting of the sun, phasing of the moon, turning of the seasons, you know, all things that a lot of pagans base their spirituality on, right? And then everything after that is an overlay. It's learned behavior, okay? So I can talk with my family that I'm working with and boil it down to earth, air, fire, water, and spirit. And so my elemental release will be to return to the earth, the flesh and the bones, to return to the air, the breath and the voice, to return to the fire, the passion and spirit, to return to the water, the blood, sweat and tears. You know, it's a beautiful release. And I have not ever run into a problem. In fact, I've had many ministers from other faith traditions ask me to use, if they can use that.
I love that.
Did that
That's
answer
beautiful. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. I don't want to leave you unanswered over there, Luke.
I'm kind of hypnotized. I'm listening to you talk about this. I'm just like, oh, I love it. So we're getting close to time, but what would you like people to know about this work that you haven't already said? Like, is there anything you need the audience to know before we go? Like, what's your, I hate to say closing words, but I guess what's your closing words?
Well, there's one sort of side thing that I'd like to say, which is, folks, I can't read the chat. So if you're asking me questions, you know, somebody please let me know. The one thing that I would have everybody know is that you're not getting out alive. And it is just ridiculous to not talk about it. And you need to know how to talk about and what to talk about. You know, you cannot explore the options if you don't have the information. You can't explore options if you don't know what they are. So, you know, check in with me, check in with somebody on the directory, but find out what it is that you should be thinking about, what it is that you should be talking about. You don't have to reinvent the wheel.
And Angie, I know that there is going to be some people, because this goes out all over, who might not have that information to hand. So could you tell us a couple of places to start that research?
Yeah, you can start with me. I'm at www.deathmidwife.org or Angie@deathmidwife.org. You know, feel free to reach out and ask me questions, and I'm happy to either direct you to something, you know, or if I can't answer it myself, you know, to direct you to something. I have a book coming out next year that I'm very excited about. And, you know, they're the only book that I would advise at this point, because there's probably going to be a lot of them coming out, is a book. It's called Final Rights, RIGHTS. It's by Lisa Carlson and Josh Slocum. And it essentially talks about what the laws are in each state regarding being able to handle your dead, home funerals, different things that you might want to have on hand for documents, that sort of thing. And but it's worth your time to have the discussion to find out what it is that you should be looking at, and whether or not you feel like this is something that you need to have a resource for in your own communities or in your own family.
I would like to say a final thing. If any of you guys are interested in this work, I highly, highly, highly recommend Angie's class. I've taken it myself. I was impressed. I was inspired. I was thrilled, and I mean, just to have the information, even if you don't become a professional death midwife, just to have this information as magical people, as pagans, as people, you know, I think it's important, and I really highly recommend this class. So normally at this time I stop the recording and that we allow the audience to ask questions. Angie, do you have a few minutes to hang out, or you need to get going? You have a few minutes? Okay. So before I sign off, I would like to say thank you to everybody, and please follow us on YouTube. Where else am I seeing you guys? I'm seeing you guys. I can't even think. Spotify, iTunes, and on Amazon. And we shall see you soon. So our next show will be in 2 weeks.